Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. You know, if you are new to this program, if you've never heard this show before, go check out our archives because we've got all kinds of great interviews with intelligent CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of companies and organizations ranging from, Netflix to Kinko's, Quicken, EO, YPO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Free, and many more. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest today, Rich Walker. He's the CEO and co-founder of Quik, also known as Quik Forms. He's started 10 different companies since the age of 12. We'll ask about that very first one. Published 2 books. He's the father of 3 boys, like I am as well. Prior to starting Quik, he actually was a financial advisor with Financial Network and a business consultant with Arthur Andersen. For those who can remember Arthur Andersen, I certainly do. Started Quik in 2002 to help people spend less time on paperwork and more time on what they do best. And of course, before we get into this episode brought to you by my company, Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcast and content marketing. And if you're listening to this, and you've ever thought about starting a podcast, shoot us an email, support@rise25.com, or you can go to our website. Lots of resources for you there at rise25.com. All right, Rich, such a pleasure to have you here. I want to ask about some of these entrepreneurial businesses you had as a kid. You actually have it with you. You were showing me before the interview, you've got this primitive, sorry if I call it a little primitive looking water gun that you created, manufactured yourself, and went out and sold yourself when you were 12, 11, 13 years old. How did that start?
Well, John, first of all, thanks for having me on this call, on this podcast. I'm very excited to be here, and it's an honor to be, amongst the names of Activision and Quicken. That's amazing. So I was struck very young about what money meant because we were very poor when I was growing up, lived on welfare. We moved a lot, and I wanted toys. I wanted things that my family couldn't afford. So I started saving my money, and I became very entrepreneurial in that way. If I could rake your leaves, if I could shovel snow off your driveway, I would do those things. One day, my neighbor, his son and I, we'd play all the time. His father came out and he handed us this water toy that he called a water weenie. So a water weenie is surgical tubing. Surgical tubing you see at a hospital, it's latex rubber. You take the tip of a ballpoint pen, the clickable kind, and you put that part in the front, tie a knot in the other end. Then you get a garden hose nozzle, put the two together, turn on the hose, and it inflates a really long balloon of water. And then it squirts 30 feet. So imagine before the Super Soaker, what did you have? You had water balloons, you had little squirt guns, that's it.
Yeah,
unless somebody got hold.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or somebody got hold of the hose and could stay at the house. But this squirts 30 feet. You just obliterated your competition.
It was mobile. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here are these little boys with these massive water power against the whole neighborhood. And at the end of all those water fights, his father took these away. And so I said to him, hey, other people want these. Can we have them? He's like, no, I'm not giving them to you. So then I got this idea because I used to go into his shed. I saw he had a reel of this tubing. And I said, hey, how much for that reel, that 25 foot? And he told me, I think it was like $12. And I said, hold on. Ran and got my piggy bank, gave him the $12. I got the reel. Then I proceeded to destroy every pen in my house. And I went out to the neighborhood the very next day and I sold out of these in a day.
Nice.
Every kid in the neighborhood was now having water weenie fights.
Nice. And so your parents couldn't find a pen anywhere.
No, I mean, they could find the ink cartridge. That was it. So I went back and bought another 25 feet. And then I bought 50 feet. And then I went on vacation. So this was in Salt Lake City, Utah. I went on vacation to California and stayed at the beach. I got on my bicycle and I proceeded to squirt every kid in every campsite I could find until I had 30 kids following me, chasing me down. Jump off the bike and I said, okay, who wants to buy one? And then they all ran home or to their camp, got money, came back, and I sold out of 50 feet of tubing. So I quickly made.
I love that marketing strategy, by the way. Just go around and squirt everyone until they buy the squirt gun off of you.
It worked. So I did that for that summer. I think I was 11. And my uncle, he said, "Hey, Rich, next summer, I run the 4th of July ceremonies at a regional park in California. I can get you a booth. If you would like to sell these, I can set you up." So, John, let's back up 4 years. When I was 8 years old, I wanted to buy this radio controlled car that cost $300. I mean, it did 30 miles an hour, it had active shocks, the whole thing. So I saved and saved and saved. And when I got the water weenies working and I suddenly had an extra $150 come in that summer, boom, I had my $300. So I went and bought the car. And time went on. I'm playing with the car. Spring's coming. My mom reminds me, "Hey, Rich, you can get that booth." So I go to my neighbor and I say, "How much for 1,000 feet of tubing?" And he says, $300. I don't have $300 anymore. Mm-hmm. So I thought about it and I said, "Hey, your son would really like to have my car for his birthday coming up in a few weeks. What do you say we trade?" And this guy must have been an angel because he said yes. He traded me 1,000 feet of tubing at his cost. Now, I forgot to mention, he was a supplier to physicians. So that's why he had access to this stuff.
Got it.
So he gave me all these tubes or reels of tubes. I then wrote to the Scripto pen company and I said, "Hey, I'm doing a project. I would like some sample pen tips. Would you send me some?"
Brilliant.
They sent me a box of 5,000 pen tips absolutely for free.
Wow.
So now I had the materials. I hired my brother to come in and help me cut lengths and tie knots for 2 weeks before the 4th of July. Then we go out to the 4th of July. We've set up this big tent and tables. And literally by 7 a.m., I'm starting to sell. By 1 o'clock, I've sold out. And I have these big picnic tables with 5 people wide, 15 people deep lined up to buy stuff from me. Money is flowing in that I'm putting into my pockets. My pockets start to overflow. My mom's pulling money out of my pockets, putting it into a cash jar. And at the end of that day, when we sold out, I paid my brother $75. I bought everybody dinner. I still had over $1,100 on that $300 investment.
Wow.
So that struck me. And everybody kept saying,
"How old were you?"
12.
12 years old. 12 years old. Wow.
And so everybody said, "Rich, what are you going to do when you grow up?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to make money. In fact, I'm going to be a millionaire by 23. And I just had this whole stars in my eyes ready to go. But I knew I'm going to start businesses because being poor and realizing people will pay you for value, especially products that they like, I was smitten. So that's what I started to do. And I saved all that money and bought a real car when I turned 16.
Now, did you grow up at all around business owners or entrepreneurs?
Not really. My uncle was a small business owner. He had a garage door business. My mom had lots of different jobs. My stepfather was in the hotel business. So no, I wasn't necessarily around a bunch of entrepreneurs that showed me how it worked. In fact, I remember when I was getting out of college, sitting down with my mentor, and he's asked me what I want to do when I graduate college. This is the beginning of senior year. And I said, "I want to start a business." He's like, "Great. What business?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I just know I'm going to start one." He's like, "Well, go work for an entrepreneur. Go see how they put money in the bank. Go understand the struggles they have, et cetera." So no, I learned this on my own. Just do it.
Yeah. A lot of trial and error, I'm sure. I want to get to asking about that mentor. I know that he had a big impact on your life, and also your life at USC. But you actually had a business at USC. It was kind of like an early Instacart, pre-internet days of grocery delivery. So tell us all about this business.
Yeah. So I go to college and again, I'm still poor. So I'm trying to figure out how to make money and not have to have a job, which I did, of course. I did lots of jobs, but I had the simple premise, and maybe this is crass, but my premise was, how do I get $1 out of everybody in Los Angeles? Like what service could I provide that everybody would pay me $1 for? And I came up with this grocery delivery service because the problem at USC at the time was there was one grocery store. Nobody liked it. The next grocery store was in a dangerous neighborhood, rather far away, and most people didn't have a car. Well, I did. And so I started Grocery Express. And I would get on my skateboard around school and tack flyers to all the different billboard places I could find to advertise, "I will buy your groceries and deliver them to you." So you got to imagine, this is pre-internet, pre-cell phone. I would have people call my dorm room where I had an answering machine, leave this lengthy message about what they want on their list. I had made a relationship with the manager at Ralph's grocery store to do this service so I could come in. And I would come in, I'd fill the grocery cart, I'd pay with my own money. And then I would go to their location and, get all these bags. I had to park illegally because parking's tough in LA.
Yeah.
Take all these bags up the stairs, deliver them, collect the money. I mean, it had to be cash, right? There was no cash apps or Venmos or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I had to trust that they were going to pay me. I mean, what if they didn't? I was strapped to do this. And man, I started to realize this sucks.
Did you employ others to do it, or was it all you?
I had one other person who was helping me put up the flyers and answer the calls, but I'm the only one who actually did the deliveries. Mm-hmm. And that other person wasn't engaged like I was. So that was one of my first lessons about partnerships, that you don't want a deadbeat partner who's not really into it. They're just kind of indulging you. Maybe they like you and want to be around you and do fun things, but that's it. They don't want to work.
Yeah. So it sounds like you kind of came to the realization this is not something you wanted to do with your time. No,
it really wasn't going to be viable. I did a couple of deliveries and said, I'm done with that. I've got to study. Yeah. I need a real job that's going to pay real bills. Because that's the other thing. Even though USC students were fairly wealthy when they're especially living off campus, it didn't mean they want to spend a lot of extra money on their groceries. I mean, maybe I could make $5 on a $50 grocery bill at most. So that's just not enough to cover the cost and time.
Yeah, I mean, and I was an early adopter of Instacart. We used it for quite a while, and they were really testing their pricing a lot. They were trying to figure out how they could do pricing that people would, be likely to take them up on their service. But that requires a lot of sophistication. I want to ask you about something. You said you grew up in a poor family. You end up at USC, which I grew up in Southern California. University of Southern California kind of has a reputation of being a lot of rich kids there. How did a poor kid end up at USC?
Well, I may be one of the few people you'll meet who paid his own way. I took out tremendous debt. I had Pell Grant and different loans and things from the government. When I attended SC, which was from 92 to 96, the starting tuition was about $15,000 a year plus living expenses. So freshman year, we kind of figured it out. Sophomore year, I went into debt. I mean, personal credit card debt. Junior year, I went into debt. By senior year, I built my skills enough that I was paying down that debt. So by the time I graduated, I had no credit card debt. Amazing credit score, by the way, because I built it all. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I lived off of credit cards and just worked my tail off. I mean, I worked up to 35 hours a week my senior year to try to just make everything work. So it was really, really tough. I mean, I had my schedule down to about the 5-minute increment of what I was going to do every day. I figured out a method of studying to get great grades and make sure I got all my homework done. I got jobs that would sometimes allow me to study at the job if there was no work to do. It was really, really challenging. It was also psychologically challenging when you're living in a dorm and some kid shows up in a Ferrari every day and gets parking tickets because he doesn't want to pay for a parking pass and just doesn't care. And how many kids drove really expensive cars, which I'm a car nut, so I'm always evaluating people by their cars. On the other hand, there was a really amazing thing that happened, which was if you're at SC, they accept you. I wasn't an outsider. It doesn't matter if I had money or not. I was invited on all the trips to go to Vail or, go hang out with rich families or whatever. It was just opportunity and people are being nice to each other. It was an amazing community and I'm super grateful that I got to go there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a similar experience, went to an affluent high school and was driving probably the crappiest car in the entire parking lot. And you see that kind of thing with other kids that have handed a brand new vehicle when they're 16 years old. And, you can rack different ways to that sort of thing. It can build resentment, in you, or you can also motivate you to do something about it.
Yeah, I remember my mom took us on a trip my freshman year. She's like, this is the last time I'm going to take my kids on a big trip like this. So let's go. We went to Puerto Vallarta, but I'm sitting at the airport. I happen to sit next to a guy and his wife. He's a Trojan and he finds out I'm a student there. He hands me his card after a 5-minute conversation. He's like, if you want an internship, just give me a call when you get back. I'm like, what is this place? It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly an amazing network and that there's something to be said for that for sure. You met your mentor, who you mentioned earlier, at 16 years old. So this is before you go off to SC, I believe, when you're still in high school. How did that come about?
Yeah. So my mom took a job at an IBM subsidiary. His name was Steve Fazio. And Steve became friends with my mom, and he was interested in youth. I mean, I think he really cared about how people were growing. So he kind of took me under his wing from time to time, and we would talk about things. And some of them were really tough things, like how friendships are going to break. And he had boys, so he understood how boys were growing, et cetera. So he really became my mentor when I went to college. And it started, I think, because he formed an internship program at his subsidiary and employed, I think, 8 to 10 college students. I was among the youngest, but not the only one who was just entering school. And so I got an internship for the summer before I went to USC, which was amazing. And I got to sit in on his executive meetings and see what the executive room was like. And he was this tough Italian New Yorker. And I watched him just tear into people. And I don't mean like maliciously, but like from a business standpoint, how to get things done, how to hold people accountable. And then I watched him praise people for their efforts and what they were doing. And he might look at somebody and say, you have good analysis, but you came to the wrong conclusion, but you did a good job trying to get there. And I learned so much from those types of interactions working with him at that place. And we built such a bond that he became my mentor through college. And that was really amazing to me because I didn't have a very strong father figure, especially from a business standpoint. My father was a minister who then became a drug addict, alcoholic, who then became a substance abuse counselor. And I love my dad. I love what he's done, but that was never my path. My stepfather, my parents divorced when I was 16. I certainly don't like hospitality business, so that wasn't going to be my path. Nobody was this business person. And so here I meet Steve, who's this just paramount business person. I mean, he ran, I think, the business development and planning for all of IBM Global. The guy knew his stuff. So I would run business ideas with him. I would talk about how things work, but also just life things that he helped me understand. So he would take me to dinners. I learned how to dress. He actually bought me my first suit when I graduated college. Took me to Brooks Brothers. He said, I'm buying you one suit. This suit will last you for 10 years. And I'm going to teach you the difference between quantity versus quality. So, I mean, there were just so many profound lessons that he gave me coming with this really poor background and not knowing a lot about the world and seeing things. I mean, even to the point of like, we would watch somebody walk through the door and he said, did you notice why that person opened the door for that person? And we would talk about body language and how people carried themselves. So it just was really, really amazing for me. And by the way, I had the internship the second summer too, where I went, first year I was in engineering. I saw what software was like. And I said, I'll never do software. I couldn't ever be a software developer. And the second summer I worked in marketing and I did market research and I fell in love with marketing and product and, fit and product placement, all those things. But yeah, Steve was really profound impact on me as I was going through college and then figuring out what I wanted to do. And if you don't mind, I'll finish the story. When he asked me, like, so what do you want to do when you graduate? And I told him I want to be an entrepreneur and start a business. He's like, okay, wait, let's start over here. What are you going to do the day you graduate? I'm like, I want to start a business. He's like, if you don't have one, how are you going to start one? He said, if you told me that you wanted to do something really mundane and boring, like if you said you wanted to make new sugar packets for coffee, it's like, I could get behind that. I can help you figure out how to distribute that. I could help you how to package it. It's like, but having no idea means nothing. So he said, how about you go find a job? And if you have a business to start by the time you graduate, don't take the job. But if you don't have a business, you have a job. That's what led me to Arthur Andersen. And I actually secured my job at Arthur Andersen before Thanksgiving of my senior year, which meant my whole senior year was easier, like less stress. And I graduated, I went to work there, and man, did I learn a lot about business working at Arthur Andersen. So
were you there through the Arthur Andersen? So they got caught up in kind of Enron scandal.
Enron, yeah.
Were you there through that period?
No, I left about 2 years prior to that happening or coming to light, I guess. I'm not sure when it exactly happened, but certainly I had friends who were still there. I watched the terrible destruction of an amazing company based on that event. And that also taught me a lot of business, because when you think about limited liability partnership, the whole idea is to limit the liability to the partner who's screwing up. But the whole company suffered for what happened in one office or a couple of offices. And that was terrible to me. My friends, they did fine. But no, I was there for 3 years after graduation till 99, and then went on to the next thing.
It was amazing to see such an iconic company get taken down. Was any other lessons from that, and ways in which you've built your career or your companies, reflecting on that experience?
Not the fact that they fell apart, but I want to tell you something I did when I was at Arthur Andersen that really helped me start my company. And I was just telling my team about this yesterday. I believe in asking yourself questions to motivate your own behavior and to help yourself grow. And frankly, I wasn't happy at Arthur Andersen, and it's coming around year 2. So I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I did not have a business idea. So every day I woke up, I said to myself, what am I going to learn today that's going to help me start a business tomorrow? And doing that kind of changed my entire perspective and how I was approaching problem solving and actually the mundane work I didn't like doing at the job. So for example, I sat in the IT office of a large company. I have to leave them nameless, but you'd know who they are, because we were working with them to do tracking of assets, their computers and whatever. And I saw this diagram on the board, a big circle with different spokes coming off it. And I said, I'm not allowed to ask you this, but can you tell me what that is? And he described to me the concept of publishing and subscribing. So we do this with magazines. You subscribe to a magazine. When they publish an edition, you get it. What about data? Well, think about this. An employee comes in, a brand new employee, you got to give them security badge, telephone, computer, access to information. Like if they're in sales, they need the sales, Dropbox folder, whatever it might be. Well, what happens is that person comes in, they fill out a bunch of HR forms. You send them to security, they fill out security forms. They fill out forms everywhere. And everybody has pieces of data without sharing it. He said, what if we could just get their data in one place, publish it to the people who are subscribed to it for the pieces of data they want? And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. I filed it away. Years later, I start my forms business. Well, what does the forms business do? We go out to the industry and we collect forms across the industry. So we have Fidelity Forms and Mass Mutual and Oppenheimer and Putnam, et cetera. We have 38,000 forms. Nobody wants all of them, but they want to subscribe to the ones they want. And when new versions come out, we publish them and they get them automatically. So that whole publish subscribe model was coming from that experience at Arthur Andersen for that one 20-minute conversation that I had, which I credit to that question of like, what am I going to learn today that's going to help me start my business tomorrow?
That's great. Before we move on to talking about founding your business with your mentor, I want to ask you about that in the early days of your relationship with him, because a lot of people are curious about how to find mentors and how to inspire them, in a sense, to take you under their wing. And it's not easy in today's busy day and age to get successful, accomplished people to do that. You spoke a lot about what he did for you, but I imagine if you reflect on how you were in that period of time, there were things that you did for him that made him motivated to want to invest that amount of time and energy in you. Can you reflect on some of the things that you did?
One thing that comes to mind that I'm remembering is something he said to me. So at the end of the summer, we were giving presentations on what we did. And I got up and gave my presentation, and I didn't sit through most of the other presentations. For some reason, I can't remember. And then the next day, when most of the other presentations took place from the other interns, I wasn't there. I think I was sick. I just wasn't there. And when I came back to the office, he sat me down in his office. He pulled me aside. He said, look, I want you to understand something that is different here. He said, you got up and talked about what you did with such enthusiasm, excitement, and true interest in what you're doing. Everybody else got up and complained about the internship. They complained that things weren't good enough. They complained that they didn't have enough time. They just complained. And he said, this is something that he wants to see more of. And so, look, I'm not saying that did anything for him, but I think maybe I reminded him of what's possible in some ways, because I didn't come into this with anything but, oh my gosh, amazing opportunity. I've had nothing. This is amazing. These other kids were privileged and coming in with like, yeah, well, this isn't good enough. I didn't get paid enough. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I think that internship, because that was freshman year, I think that was part of why he mentored me, because he wanted to help encourage that growth and that, I guess, that exuberance.
Yeah. So tell me, so you, at 26 years old, you end up going into business with your mentor. That's unusual. How did that come about?
So I left Arthur Andersen to become a consultant that was more independent. And I ended up working for a client that was a dot-com roller coaster. So back in the year 2000, they had raised $15 million and then spent $18 million. And you can do the math. You just can't keep going. And I was part of that for the last stage, like the last 9 months of it, not the first 9 months. And I came out of that with some interesting relationships. One was with a lawyer in Los Angeles who was kind of a lawyer to a bunch of different entrepreneurial startups. And he called me. He's like, Rich, I know you're a free agent now. I've got 3 startups that all need a CTO. You choose which one you want to be the CTO for, and let's go. Well, at that point, I was just so excited about being an entrepreneur. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I also had this feeling of I don't want to do tech anymore. I was just kind of tired of it. And my mentor called me at the exact same time. So Steve calls and he's like, hey, I'm not going to run my financial planning business forever. So he retired from IBM, realized he was so good at managing his own money. He wanted to do that for others. He didn't need to make money. He didn't need to do it. He liked to work. And he said, I want to retire from this at some point, and I want to know that my clients are going to be in good hands. Why don't you come join me in my business? And then
you managed money at this point?
It's financial advisement. It's helping people roll over 401ks to IRAs. It's making life insurance investments. It's really just planning their future and trying to figure out financially how to achieve their goals and then building plans to do it. So he was a certified financial planner. And I thought, wow, you know what? I got my degree in finance, not tech. And why don't I go do this? I love financial. I love helping people achieve their goals. I love the coaching process, the psychology, et cetera. That sounds like a great fit for me. He was offering me an opportunity to come join him in his business. And he made me a really amazing offer. He said, I'll take my revenue and we'll split it in half on day one. You will make an income on day one. I will take half. And then he said, the rule though is if at any time in the next 2 years we split, you got to pay me that back. So I'll invest in you and we'll build this up. And then 5, 6, 10 years from now, you can take over the whole business and I'll retire out of it. I've got this clientele that's working, et cetera. So that was the premise of why we started. And I'm like, that's great. I'll get to work with my mentor and I'll get to grow the business. And, and we did. And it was interesting because my first focus was on automation and efficiency and technology. So I started building things for us, integration for charting systems to reflect what customer portfolios had. I built a Monte Carlo simulator, which is to predict outcomes based on risk and time horizons with people's portfolios. And this ultimately led to how I started the forms business, because having worked with them for 6 months, getting my licenses, and then finally earning the trust and respect of my own client, I had to handwrite their forms. I'm like, this is dumb. I'm going to make $4 an hour handwriting forms now. So I built tech and I started filling out forms automatically. The irony was, so imagine Steve is this really experienced IBM guy who ran software companies. I showed him my software and he was like, oh, okay. Didn't really care.
Not interested.
And it took me 3 months to get him to actually try it. And then he tried it and he was like, why haven't I been using this for 3 months? This is amazing. This is the best software ever. I'm like, I told you. And then it changed.
Was he not interested in, did he join you in that new business? How did it spin off?
Well, so this is where things got interesting. We had somewhat of a falling out. And when we were talking about our business, so let me back up. The tech side of this, I built it as a tool for myself. I really didn't intend to take it to market. So I just kept, doing our work, et cetera. And I was refining how he and I were going to be financial planners together. And I started to realize I was not good with his clients. I wasn't their age. I didn't have their perspective. I didn't have kids. I didn't put kids through college. I just didn't get it. And I was working with a much younger clientele that was more my style, like the Arthur Andersen guys. So I started to realize there's this dichotomy of like, I don't want to take over his business because I don't know how to service it. And I want to focus on the business a little differently. Meanwhile, I had actually gone to my mom, who's also a technologist, and said, why don't we put this software together and see what happens? And so I worked totally in my spare time to build this out with her to do our first install. And our first install was February 11, 2002. And around that point in time, my relationship with Steve came to a head. Now, part of it was I'm changing direction and he had his own direction, and that didn't necessarily work for him. I think part of it also, though, was I think he and I were so alike, we started to butt heads. The mentor relationship was dying because now we were peers. And I have a strong personality. I admit that. I have my ways of doing things, and he has a very strong way of doing things. I laugh. I still think about this because one day he's actually trying to teach me how to put stamps on an envelope. And then he stopped himself. He's like, why am I saying this to you? You know how to do this, right? I'm like, yeah, I've done thousands. I know how to do this. That was kind of the level of the detail he wanted to have in his business and how I was challenging it, because now he had to delegate and let go of what was his baby, essentially. So when I confronted him or presented to him like, hey, I want to change the design or the way that we're doing things, he turned and said, why don't we just split and not be partners then? And that caught me off surprise. I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that, because at this point I had not committed to the software business. That was going to be my mom. She was going to run it. I was just going to help her with marketing, sales, whatever. And that struck me, and then it became real. And then we had actually a pretty tense couple of moments of kind of fighting about it. And also I owed him that money back. Mm. So he then started pestering me and just kind of poking and saying, how are you going to pay me back? You got to pay me back. So how are you going to do that? And it was making it pretty difficult for me. So eventually I decided, you know what? I'm going to cash out my 401k and pay all the penalties. I'm going to sell my dream car, which was a BMW M3. I'm going to go buy the cheapest car I can afford, and I'm just going to give him the cash. And so I showed up to a meeting with him, and I handed him a check silently, and he looked at it and he's like, is this real? I'm like, yeah, it's real. And he was like, how did you do this? I said, doesn't really matter, does it? I'm paying you back. And then he got really personal again. He's like, no, Rich, how did you do this? Like, how did you come up with this money? Because he knew I had nothing. And I told him, he's like, wow. He's like, that is exactly what I would have done in your shoes. He's like, I'm impressed. This again tells you how similar we were. And I guess maybe I learned some things from him. Learned a lot from him.
Yeah. It sounds like the way you describe it now, it sounds like maybe you were able to patch things up later.
Not exactly. It was more that we were on good terms, but he was no longer my mentor. I wasn't really seeking advice from him. And look, I think part of it is, I think he wanted to be part of the software business, and me paying him off was a way to say, there is nothing here. We're splitting paths because I see the software opportunity. And look, John, there's another thing that happened for me about my psychology about money, which was in financial advisement. I have to tell somebody, hey, if you want to reach your goal, save $15,000 a year. Sorry, $16,000 a year, because you got to pay me $1,000. And I felt guilty about asking people to pay me when they needed to save that money. Software, I don't feel guilty about people paying for my software. So I realized I can sell software. I have a hard time selling financial services as my business. And that was a clarity moment where I said, you know what? I think it's time for me to shift. And I took 2 years to transition from financial advisement, transition my clients off to being full-time in the software with my mom. And by then I saw the vision of what the software could do. So yeah, I mean, we kept in touch over the years, but our relationship was never the same after that, unfortunately.
Yeah, kind of the perils of going to business with a mentor.
Yeah. And honestly, I see it as one of the greatest gifts that he ever gave me, because in a way it was like he kicked me out of the nest and made me fly. I got put into a position where I had literally $0. I had a broken engagement with my fiance. I had a beater car and this brand new fledgling business in a time of downturn in the market.
After 9/11.
Yeah, the dot-com bubble burst, everything. Yeah. So I just looked at it and said, wow, I have to be a man. I have to stand up and be my own person, and I'm going to have to make it through this. And so that's what we did.
And what was it like in those early days? I imagine it took a little while before it gained traction.
Yeah, it did. I made $1,000 a month income for the first 4 years of this company, and my rent was over $1,000 a month. When I talk about being an entrepreneur with people and bootstrapping it, I say, how well do you sleep at night? And the thing is, like my wife, she could never sleep at night knowing she doesn't know how to pay rent the next month. I never knew how I was going to pay rent the next month after I paid this month's rent. And I never lost a minute of sleep over that, because I saw money as a tool. I said, I'll figure it out. I'll always figure it out. And in those 4 years, and really 5 and 6 years too, I never missed a payment, never late on anything. I always was totally covered. I ate food. I had gas for my car. I made it work. I went in debt.
So help me. How did you make it work if you weren't getting paid enough for your rent?
Yeah, I know. So, one of the great things at that moment in time was that every credit card company in the world was giving out 0% interest.
Mm-hmm.
I had every 0% interest offer you could imagine. And I had learned about building credit from age 18. Here I am at 26 years old. I had access to over 150,000 of credit, revolving credit. So if I needed money, I could go take out $10,000 with 0% interest. Maybe a small penalty to withdraw it, or sometimes none. I had all sorts of loans that were at like 1%, 2% for the life of the loan. Wow. It was like college loans all over again.
Kind of carried that forward in the first early years of the business in order to finance the business.
The first 13 years of the business, 14 years of the business, maybe 15 years. I think it was 15 years before we paid it off. Wow. Yeah, I carried a lot of debt. The other side of it was my mom was my business partner. She would mortgage her house, home equity line. And so I put 150,000 of revolving credit. She put 150,000 of mortgage credit. But other things would happen. It would be amazing. Here it is, June 30th. I got to pay rent on July 1st. And boom, somebody ordered $6,000 worth of software, paid in advance. I'm like, we can pay rent. Literally, those things happened. Sometimes I'd get a gift. Somebody gave me like $1,000 gift. And I was like, this works. This'll do it. So yeah, there's creative ways to figure it out and lucky ways too.
Yeah. So going from financial planning to basically software entrepreneur is a pretty massive shift. But at the same time, you were scratching your own itch, which is a classic, entrepreneurial move, right? We realize I have this pain. There are others out there who have this pain as well. But I'm sensing that it wasn't as easy as just hang a shingle. Here's the solution. We're done. Talk about some of the struggles and the challenges and the iterations that you went through in those early years.
Yeah, my mom and I had a simple premise. We'll charge $150 a year for the software license. We'll get 1,000 people to pay us. That should not be hard in the first year. That's 150,000. We'll pay ourselves 50,000 each and have 50,000 for operations. Boom, we're good, right?
Boom, yeah, got it all planned out.
Yeah. Okay. So in year one, we signed up 6 users.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
In year 2, I think we signed up 60 or 70 more. Maybe 80. It was tough.
10x.
Yeah, right. It was tough. And then of course you always hear about the idea of pivoting. And I always tell people who want to be entrepreneurs, your first idea is not your best one. It's the one that gets you out of bed and makes you excited to start the business. And frankly, our first idea wasn't the best one either. So 2 years into the business, I realized the core component that runs our software, which I call the engine, could be pulled out and served to clients as an individual component, as an API. And we decided in 2004, we're going to turn that on. And our first customer was Mass Mutual Life Insurance with 5,500 users. So suddenly I went from selling 1 license at a time to 5,000 licenses. Yeah, at a smaller price point, but nonetheless, making a bunch of money with a bunch of users with 1 sale. And I was like, oh, wait a minute here. Wow. I like this sales process better. So we pivoted from being a retail turnkey product to an API-based product. We still had the retail. We never grew the retail product to where it could be, but we grew that enterprise sale. And if you look at our market, by the first 5 years, we had like 12 or 15 of the top 20 companies using that API behind the scenes. And to this day, we have 18 of the top 20 using that product. So it was a really good pivot for us and a change in dynamic for the business. And besides which, charging somebody $150 versus somebody 25,000 setup fee, it does wonders for your revenue.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. At the same time, over the last 20 years, there's been so many changes in the game from, 20 years ago, I'm pretty sure it was still shipping out CD-ROMs to install software to the movement towards cloud-based computing. So talk about some of those big shifts in the world of software over the last 20 years and how you navigated them.
Yeah, we were cloud-based from the beginning before it was called cloud, which kind of was bewildering. Like, what do you mean cloud? But we decided we're not going to ship any physical product because that required state tax or sales tax. I'm sorry. We didn't want to deal with that. That was just a simplicity problem. Second was, how do you get the forms? Our competitor was sending out a CD of forms or a DVD every 3 months. And we said, you should be able to get them right now. So we built a download service to download all those things. But yeah, we changed a lot over the years. I like to think we reinvented ourselves from the ground up several times, going from a turnkey kind of traditional SaaS product, software as a service product, to an API-based product that's all white labeled behind the scenes, to changing the forms model. We were originally entirely PDF. We just lived on the PDF model. Pardon me. In 2012, I invented the HTML form viewer. So it was now independent of Adobe, and it could be shown on any browser, on any device. You also have to remember, one of the biggest changes is the iPad. Financial services was notoriously PC, Microsoft PC based. And so it was really easy. But as soon as the iPad came out, within a year, 50% of financial advisors had an iPad. And now we had to think about Mac OS, and PDF was not a good fit for that. So we had to adapt. It took me 4 years to transition that into this HTML model. And then it took more years to get customers to buy into it and start using it. So then in 2017, we decided we're going to go back to being a turnkey company and having more of a traditional SaaS product. And we literally spent 2 years building it from the ground up, thinking it would take 6 months, took 2 years just to get out the door. And now we're in our 3rd year of that product. It's growing, it's evolving. We're super excited about what that brings to us. So yeah, there's other things that you shift. It's not just product. One of the things you learn as an entrepreneur is what works and what doesn't work. And in 2015, one of those key decisions was to start saying no to customers. And that was so hard to do. Somebody's offering $150,000 to do their thing, and you say no. We decided we're going to be hyper-focused on being the forms company. We do forms management, forms delivery. That's it. And guess what happened? Our revenue started growing by 50% a year over year. So yeah, we've had a lot of change in that time.
Wow. I know we're running short on time. I always like asking this same question at the end. So I'm a big fan of gratitude. You've already mentioned your mother, your mentor you went into business with, but I love to ask people about those types of relationships who have been critical, helping you along the way. Who would you want to call out?
I'd actually really like to thank my COO, Don. He joined our company for a job because he wanted to be part of a startup. He took such little salary to be part of something. He took a menial role that was below him, and he just came in here and added value. He is our COO because he is the balance to me, the yin and the yang. We have totally different views on things, but we're always in alignment. 100% of the time, we're in alignment. And he's somebody that I can go to talk about the toughest parts of our business and get clarity. He and I both go to each other with the anger venting need to calm down and come back to reality, and then have a better discourse with whoever we needed to have that discourse with. I honestly credit him with keeping me in check, because I'm like an unbridled horse. I'm an entrepreneur. I can easily have shiny object syndrome, and I have. I also want to run 100 miles per hour at all times. And he tempers that to keep us on the right path at all times. So I don't know where I'd be without him joining our company and doing the work to earn the trust and the respect and, everything that goes with becoming a partner in the company. So I'm super proud of that relationship. I've met lots of entrepreneurs who don't have that kind of relationship. And so I'm just very, very grateful to have found it by luck and happenstance, and for he and I to become good friends.
That's great. Rich, this has been such a pleasure. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Quik Forms CEO, and of course, our website. I love talking to people, so I welcome any kind of inquiry. My LinkedIn rule is you should try to talk to me before we actually try to become LinkedIn buddies. So you can send me a message or email me, rwalker@quikforms.com. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Rich. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.